That night was unlike any other. A stillness in the air that felt almost unnatural, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I was standing at the sink, washing the dishes, allowing the warm water to glide over my hands, the soft, rhythmic sound of bubbles popping and water flowing filling the space around me. My husband, Daniel, had just left the house. His usual routine of going out for a quick grocery run. He'd told me he was stopping by the small market on Atlantic Avenue to grab a few things for breakfast tomorrow. I didn't question it. I simply nodded, lost in the quiet comfort of the evening, and turned back to the dishes that seemed to pile up endlessly. There was something soothing about this rare silence, something I cherished. The house was mine, all mine, in these few moments when Daniel was out. There was no background noise from the TV, no idle chatter from the radio, just the soft, comforting sounds of the home I'd come to love. My hands worked automatically, the motion of scrubbing plates almost meditative. I didn't realize how much I needed this time until it was here, the rare, peaceful interlude when everything felt in place. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. But that night was different. As I stood there, absorbed in the rhythm of washing the dishes, I suddenly felt a presence. A warm breath against the back of my neck. It was so sudden, so close that I froze in place. The hairs on my arms stood up, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard a sound of footsteps. It was as though someone had simply appeared, standing just behind me, so near I could feel their warmth, their very presence pressing in on me. I turned, my heart racing, but no one was there. The kitchen was empty, the door still closed. And yet I knew he was there, right behind me. My husband's friend. He never said a word, not one word. He didn't touch me, didn't make a sound, but there was something palpable in the air. I could feel his gaze, sharp, heavy, and all-encompassing. My breath caught in my throat as the silence between us stretched on, unbearable and thick, like time itself had stopped. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he spoke. "You felt it too, didn't you?" His words slid into the stillness of the room like a knife through soft fabric. I should have left, but I stood still. And in that moment everything changed. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old, living in a cozy 2-bedroom house in Brooklyn, New York, with my husband, Andrew. The kitchen, warm and inviting, was bathed in the soft glow of a pendant light that hung above the sink, casting long shadows on the walls. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall, and the steady flow of water were the only sounds in the house. It was the perfect kind of night for solitude, the kind I'd come to cherish after a long week. Peaceful, undisturbed, and quiet. But that was before everything changed. I sighed in relief, allowing the warmth of the water to seep into my tired skin, easing the knots in my shoulders and the dull ache that had settled in my lower back from the day's errands. The familiar sensation of the soapy water swirling around my hands was almost therapeutic, washing away not just the dishes, but the remnants of stress that had clung to me all day. My motions became rhythmic, almost meditative, a perfect escape from the chaos of the outside world. Pick up the plate, scrub it clean, rinse it under the faucet, place it on the rack to dry. Again and again. Each movement was a quiet little victory in an otherwise hectic day. Outside, the faint glow of streetlights spilled through the window, casting a pale yellow haze across the wet pavement below. The light reflected in uneven streaks on the glass, like the city was slowly blinking its tired eyes. The sound of honking horns and distant conversations floated in from the busy street, the noise of Brooklyn never quite fading, always reminding me that, no matter how quiet my house felt in this moment, the city never truly slept. I closed my eyes for just a moment, relishing the solitude, letting the last bit of silence settle in before Daniel came back. His car would be pulling into the driveway any minute now, and the calm would be replaced with the usual routine. His chatter about the store, the plans for the weekend, the small details of everyday life that made up our world. I wasn't complaining. I loved him. But sometimes, like tonight, I needed these few minutes, this rare slice of stillness. But as I stood there, lost in the soft rhythm of my work, a strange feeling crept over me, a sudden unease that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard the familiar creak of the floorboards. But something in the air had shifted. A presence, intangible yet unmistakable, pressed in on me, causing my body to freeze. I couldn't explain it, but I knew someone was behind me. My breath caught in my throat, the air around me suddenly feeling too thick, too close. A scent filled my nostrils, sharp and familiar. It was a mix of sandalwood and tobacco, a smell that should have been comforting, but instead sent a cold wave of anxiety rippling through me. It wasn't the kind of fragrance that lingered in our home. Daniel wasn't a smoker, but it was the exact scent I had come to recognize far too well. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Lucas Hale, Daniel's best friend since college. I clenched the wet plate in my hand, trying desperately to keep my nerves in check. My mind raced, but I fought to stay calm, to reason with myself. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe Lucas just dropped by to say hello. It's not unusual for him to visit. But there was something off about this moment. Something wrong. I hadn't heard his footsteps. No soft creak of the door opening. No sound of his heavy boots crossing the floor. And why, out of all places, was he standing so close behind me? Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body pressing against my back. A warmth that didn't belong. My heart thudded in my chest, louder now, as the silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to steady my trembling hands, and I spoke, my voice shaking only slightly despite my best efforts. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" There was no immediate response. Only the oppressive silence that seemed to stretch and stretch, filling the room with a heaviness that I couldn't quite shake. It felt like time itself had slowed, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. But in that moment, I was the one left waiting, trapped in the uneasy stillness, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. I heard a low, soft chuckle against the back of my neck. A shiver ran down my spine. "Just wanted to look at you." I frowned. The answer was vague, unclear. I continued washing the dishes, trying to pretend I wasn't aware of his every breath, his every movement, but the silence that stretched between us was uncomfortable. It was heavy, thick, like an invisible string tightening the space around us. His eyes, I didn't look, but I could feel them like a sharp blade sliding across my skin. "You're so quiet for someone who just walked in." I tried to keep my voice calm, but even I could hear the strain in it. "Didn't want to bother you." The sarcasm was hidden in every word. I bit my lip, gripping the edge of the sink. The water was still running, but I couldn't feel its warmth anymore. Lucas shifted. It was just a small movement, but enough for me to realize that the distance between us had changed. He came closer. I turned my head a little, enough to catch his image in my peripheral vision. The pale yellow light from the kitchen lamp cast sharp shadows and light on Lucas's face. His eyes locked on mine, black, silent, filled with something unreadable. And then a slow smirk tugged at the corners of his lips, as if he knew something that I didn't. I clenched my fists. A knot of unease twisted in my stomach, a kind of silent warning in my mind. I didn't like this. Didn't like the way Lucas was looking at me. Didn't like the way he was standing so close. Didn't like the thick air that hung in the kitchen. I cleared my throat, trying to control my breathing. "Where's my husband?" I asked, my voice light, but there was no hiding the tension in each word. Lucas shrugged, still smiling. "Still out." He paused, tilted his head. "Thought you might need someone to be with." My stomach clenched, not at the words themselves, but the way he said them, like he knew exactly what each word would do to me, like he was testing me. I swallowed, trying to relax my body. "I don't need anyone. I'm just washing dishes." My voice was a little harder. Lucas leaned against the counter. His arms crossed over his chest, his eyes never leaving mine. "Do you always work this hard?" I forced a smile, trying to keep things light. "Someone has to clean up after dinner." But Lucas didn't smile. Instead, he tilted his head, his gaze slowly tracing over my face, as if assessing something. "I don't think Daniel appreciates you enough." Froze. I turned my head completely, my eyes meeting his. "What?" Lucas didn't answer right away. His silence hung between us, thick and uncomfortable, as he simply stared at me. His gaze was intense, unwavering, almost as if he was looking beyond my exterior, searching for something buried deep inside me, something he hoped to uncover. It was as if his eyes were trying to peel away the layers I had so carefully constructed, probing for a truth I wasn't sure I even knew. The weight of his stare was unbearable, a tension I could feel crawling up my spine. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It was lower, almost a murmur, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness, a hint of something dark that made my skin prickle. "He leaves you alone too much," he said, his words slicing through the silence like a blade. The air in the kitchen felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were closing in around me. I could almost taste the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. My grip tightened on the edge of the sink, my knuckles going white as I tried to steady my breath. I couldn't let him see how much his words had affected me. This was a boundary, a fragile, unspoken boundary, that had just been pushed to its absolute limit. I could feel it in the air, that shift, that subtle change. Lucas knew it too. He was aware, and I couldn't deny it. The game had changed, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to play. I turned back to the sink, trying to keep my face neutral, to keep my movements steady. The water was still running, the gentle sound of it filling the space around me, but it no longer felt calming. It only served as a reminder that I was here, standing in my own kitchen, trapped in a moment I couldn't escape. A normal night, a normal conversation with Lucas. Just Lucas. But everything felt off. Nothing was normal anymore. His presence, like a shadow, loomed over me. I couldn't escape it, couldn't shake the feeling that he was too close, standing just behind me, hovering in the space that should have been mine. The warmth of his body was faint but unmistakable, seeping through the thin fabric of my shirt, pressing against my back in a way that made my breath hitch. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just him standing too close, but the air was thick with something unspoken, something that made every nerve in my body go on high alert. I clenched my jaw, feeling the tension in my muscles tightening, my whole body on edge. A part of me wanted to turn around, to face him directly, to tell him, no, demand that he leave, that this wasn't okay, that the line he had just crossed couldn't be ignored. But another part of me, a much deeper and darker part, held me in place. It whispered to me, almost seductively, that I shouldn't move, that I shouldn't look at him. Because if I did, if I turned around, if I met his eyes, I would have to confront something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Something I didn't fully understand. Something that, once realized, could never be undone. Which was worse. To stay silent, to let him be this close without confronting it. Or to face whatever it was, whatever he was stirring up inside me, and risk everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, unraveling in a single moment. The weight of the choice pressed down on me, but still I didn't move. I stayed there, locked in place, not daring to look back, not daring to face the truth that was now hanging in the air between us. After a long moment, I heard Lucas speak. "You should stop." His voice was low and slow, as if each word had been carefully chosen to fall into the space between us with an invisible weight. Froze. "Stop what?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it wasn't as steady as before. Lucas didn't answer right away. I could feel his eyes moving along the back of my neck, considering something. Then he took a step back. The sudden distance was strangely jarring. "Okay," he said, his voice unreadable. "See you later." I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath the whole time. I heard his footsteps echo through the quiet house. A moment later, the front door closed. He was gone. I stood there, staring at the water running into the sink, trying to steady my breathing. But no matter how hard I tried, the feeling of his presence remained, and I knew deep down that this wouldn't be the last time I'd feel him behind me. I clenched my fists. A strange feeling welled up in my chest, something that wasn't fear but also not quite safety. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps, slow, cautious, coming back. I spun around, my heart racing. Part of me hoped to see Daniel. Maybe he'd forgotten something and come back to get it. But no, it was Lucas. He stood in the doorway, his tall figure casting a shadow on the floor. His eyes didn't leave me, unwavering. No hesitation, no regrets. I swallowed. "Why are you still here?" Lucas didn't answer right away. He stepped inside, slamming the door behind him slowly, deliberately. I flinched at the sound. Lucas tilted his head, his eyes dark, his voice light but dangerous. "You forgot something." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too claustrophobic. I knew I should run away now, but my feet wouldn't move. "You should go, Lucas." My voice was harder than before, but I wasn't sure if it was strong enough to drive him away. A slow smile spread across his lips, not exactly cheerful, but lazy and knowing. "You feel it too, don't you, Emma?" I took a breath, feeling the line between us completely blur. Lucas stepped closer, slowly, with moderation, until there was only a breath between us. "He trusts you," he whispered, his breath fanning my cheek. "Maybe too much." I gripped the edge of the counter. My control was slipping. The air between us was as thick as an undiscovered secret. I felt Lucas's hand brush my arm, just barely, a delicate touch, but enough to send a jolt of electricity down my spine. I should have pushed him away. I should have said something. Instead, I just stood still. His lips hovered dangerously above mine, waiting. The moment lingered in the air between us, heavy and thick, suffocating, until the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the tension like a bucket of cold water. It was like reality had come rushing back, jarring and unexpected. My entire body froze. For a split second, so did Lucas. His eyes, still dark with that unreadable emotion, met mine, and we both realized, with a horrifying clarity, what had almost happened, what we had almost crossed into. The invisible line that had been so delicately balanced had shifted, and the weight of it was suffocating. The sound of the car engine dying away in the driveway was the catalyst that snapped me out of my trance. I didn't even think, just acted on instinct. My hands shot out, pushing Lucas away, the force behind it surprising even me. I was shaking, my breath coming in sharp, frantic gasps. The room seemed to spin as my pulse hammered in my throat. "Go now," I demanded, the words barely a whisper, but charged with urgency. Lucas didn't argue. He stood there, his gaze locking with mine, dark and unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us moved, and it was as if time had paused. He, still and tense, me, heart racing and hands trembling. There was something in that look, something unspoken, that made my stomach twist, but I didn't dare acknowledge it. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Lucas backed away, his footsteps barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. He gave me one last look, a look that felt like a promise, or maybe a warning. Then, without a word, he disappeared through the back door, leaving me alone in the kitchen, my heart still thundering in my chest, my hands shaking as I pressed them against my ribs, desperately trying to calm myself. The seconds that followed felt like hours. My thoughts were jumbled, a chaotic mix of confusion and guilt, but there was no time to process it. The front door swung open. Daniel was home. I couldn't breathe for a moment, the rush of air in my lungs suddenly feeling too thin, too shallow. I quickly composed myself, turning toward the sound of his voice, forcing a calmness into my expression that I didn't feel. He stood in the doorway, bags of groceries in hand, completely unaware of what had just occurred in the silence of our kitchen. "Baby, I got everything we need," he said with a smile. His voice warm, casual, normal. It was like the world had shifted back into place, but I couldn't shake the tension that still clung to me, lingering in the spaces between my breaths. I swallowed hard, trying to push the reality of what had just happened out of my mind. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to turn around, to face him. I had to hide it, had to make it seem like everything was fine, even though I was anything but fine. The air around me felt thick with something I didn't understand, something I was trying desperately to ignore. Daniel set the grocery bags down on the counter, his usual carefree demeanor never wavering. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close, his lips pressing a soft kiss to my temple, the familiar warmth of his touch grounding me, pulling me back into the moment. But the sensation didn't soothe me. It only reminded me of the jagged edges of the moment that had just passed. "Are you okay? You look a little flushed," he said, his voice tinged with concern. The words hit me harder than I expected. The simple, innocent question, the weight of his care, made everything feel even more impossible to bear. I swallowed again, my throat dry, and nodded quickly. "Yeah, it's probably just the steam," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Daniel laughed, the sound of it so normal, so genuine. But as I stood there, with his arms around me, trying to steady myself against the hurricane of emotions that threatened to crash through me, I couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that something had changed. Something that I didn't know how to face, something that I couldn't undo. "I told you not to overwork yourself." Daniel's voice was light, teasing, as he began unpacking the groceries, but I could hear the underlying concern in it. He was trying to lighten the mood, to make everything feel normal again, but I couldn't shake the heavy knot in my chest. As I helped him, I forced a smile, though it felt tight and unnatural. My hands fumbled with the items in the bags, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far from the kitchen, far from the smell of fresh bread and the gentle clink of glass bottles being set on the counter. I tried to laugh along with him, but even as the sound left my lips, it felt hollow. I should feel relieved, I told myself. I should feel like everything is fine now, that nothing happened. But deep down I knew. This wasn't the end. Well, this was just the beginning. The seed had been planted, and I could already feel it growing, slowly, uncomfortably, deep inside me. It was as if something had shifted in the air, something that couldn't be unseen, something that could never be forgotten. As I helped Daniel unpack, I did my best to control my breathing, but my heart was still hammering faster than normal, my pulse quickening with every movement. Each time my hands brushed against the cold cardboard box or the smooth, hard surface of a milk bottle, my body tensed and I flinched, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. But it wasn't just the touch of the objects. It was the echo of Lucas's presence, still clinging to me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. His touch, so faint but so real, had left an imprint I couldn't shake. His closeness, the way he'd stood behind me, so near, so familiar. It was as if I could still feel him there, that invisible line between us hanging by a thread, the boundaries we'd both ignored. And then his eyes, those dark, searching eyes, piercing me with a knowing that made my stomach churn. I should have felt relieved, even safe. But instead, the opposite was true. The thought of what had almost happened, the tension that had almost snapped, haunted me. What if Daniel's arrival had been just a moment too late? What if I hadn't heard the sound of the car pulling into the driveway when I did? What if I hadn't pushed Lucas away in time? I couldn't help the wave of anxiety that washed over me, the question digging into my thoughts like an insistent thorn. What if I had given in? I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to entertain the possibility, but the thoughts were relentless. They slid into every corner of my mind, seeping in like an indelible stain, impossible to remove. I wasn't sure how to feel, what to think, or where to put it all. The fear, the confusion, the shame. It was all tangled up inside me, and no matter how much I tried to push it down, it wouldn't stay buried. Meanwhile, Daniel remained completely unaware. He was talking, chatting about the new neighbors, about a story he'd heard on the radio during his drive. I nodded along, offering a soft chuckle when appropriate, but my mind was elsewhere. It was impossible to focus on anything but what had just transpired, what I had almost allowed to happen. As I placed the last of the groceries on the counter, I felt Daniel's arms slip around me from behind, pulling me close, his chin resting on my shoulder. It was meant to be a simple, comforting gesture, but it felt too much, too soon. My body stiffened instinctively, a brief moment of tension flaring up as I fought to keep myself under control. His warmth, his comfort, his closeness, everything about it felt too much, too familiar, too safe. "Are you sure you're okay?" Daniel's voice, soft and tender, seeped into my ear, full of concern. I could hear the genuine worry in his tone, but all I could think about was Lucas. His voice, his eyes, his presence. The way I had almost let everything slip. For a moment I froze, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to act. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thick, too heavy. But then I did it. I forced myself to relax, to fall into his arms. I needed to be convincing. I needed to believe that everything was fine, that I was fine. I exhaled slowly and turned my face just enough to press my cheek against his, closing my eyes as I nodded. "Yeah, just tired," I said, the words coming out too quickly, too flat. It was a lie, but it was the only one I could offer, the only one I could say without unraveling. I had to pretend I wasn't suffocating under the weight of my own thoughts, under the remnants of that moment that still lingered. Daniel didn't seem to notice the unease in my voice, the way my words lacked their usual warmth. He chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. "I get it. It's been a long day." He kissed the top of my head, but as he did, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if the truth came to light? What if I couldn't keep up the facade much longer? But I didn't have the answers, not yet. All I knew was that the world felt off balance now, and I didn't know how to fix it. Daniel's lips brushed softly against my neck, the warm pressure lingering for just a moment before he pulled away. His movements natural, effortless. He turned back to the fridge, starting to unpack the last of the groceries, arranging everything neatly as he always did. I watched him, my gaze fixed on the way he worked, his back to me, completely unaware of the storm brewing just behind him. He was focused, humming softly to himself as he organized the food with his usual care. He trusted me. He trusted Lucas. The weight of the moment hit me then, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I bit my lip, the guilt rising inside me like a tidal wave, threatening to crash over me, to drown me in its relentless tide. I didn't do anything wrong, I tried to tell myself, but the words didn't come out convincingly enough. Was that still true, though, if a small part of me hadn't wanted Lucas to leave right then? That tiny, unsettling part of me that had begged him to stay, if only for just a moment longer. I couldn't answer. I didn't want to answer. But it lingered, that question, like a shadow that refused to fade. In the days that followed, I threw myself into normalcy. I tried with every ounce of my being to forget everything. I told myself it had never happened, that the touch of his fingers on my wrist was nothing more than an illusion, a trick of the mind. That the way Lucas had stood so close, so dangerously close, wasn't enough to make me feel the sharp edge of something I didn't want to acknowledge. But the truth was, I couldn't forget. I couldn't pretend it didn't happen. The way I felt his presence before I even saw him, the way the air seemed to shift whenever he was near, everything about that moment, about what we almost shared, haunted me. And then there was Lucas. He wouldn't let me forget. He couldn't, not with the way his eyes always seemed to find me, no matter where I was. I would wake up in the morning with the image of his face hovering just beneath my eyelids, and every time I turned a corner or stepped into a new room, it was as though he was waiting, lurking in the shadows, always just out of sight but never far enough away to feel safe. And that only made me more uneasy. The unease twisted inside me, growing, spreading into every corner of my daily life. Every time I went to the grocery store, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I would turn, convinced that someone was just out of my line of sight, lurking in the aisles, waiting for me to turn around. The sensation was constant, like an invisible hand on my shoulder. It didn't help that the coffee shop near my house, where I always stopped for my morning latte, seemed to carry that same energy. I couldn't go there anymore without feeling the prickling sensation that someone's eyes were on me, just across the street, watching, studying, waiting. But it wasn't just my imagination, was it? Because every time I glanced up, I could have sworn I saw him, lurking just beyond the glass, the sharpness of his gaze cutting through the distance. Then, one night, as I stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, it happened again. I didn't need to see him to know he was there. The moment I picked up the glass, A chill ran down my spine and my heart sank. It was a feeling I had come to dread, the undeniable presence of someone watching, waiting. I knew exactly where he was, even before I saw him. I turned slowly, my hand shaking slightly as I set the glass down, and there he was. Lucas. He stood outside the kitchen window, hidden in the dark, the shadows of the night swallowing him whole except for the faint outline of his form. The streetlights cast just enough light to make out the sharp angles of his face. His eyes glinting in the dim light, sharp and focused. His expression was unreadable, but there was a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. It was as if he knew exactly what I was feeling, as if he could hear the frantic pounding of my heart from where he stood, out of sight but within reach. It was as if he knew the fear that had become my constant companion. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't move. Couldn't. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, thicker, as though it had been charged with electricity, waiting for something to snap. I wasn't sure if I was afraid of what he might do, or if I was afraid of what I might do if I let myself face him again. The intensity of his presence, even from outside, made everything feel wrong. Too intimate, too dangerous. The longer I stood there, the harder it became to breathe. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I blinked, my eyes scanning the window, but there was no sign of him anymore. The silence that followed felt oppressive, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting, always just beyond my reach. My hands trembled as I picked up the glass again, trying to steady myself, trying to convince myself that this was just another moment to ignore, just another thing to push aside. But deep down I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something had shifted, and I didn't know how to undo it. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.